Okay, so we've seen then that the macromolecules, the proteins, the carbs, and the fatty acids or the lipids, they make up the organelles. And then when we put the organelles together with a membrane and a cytoplasm, we form cells. And some cells, actually, some organisms, I should say, are just one cell large, like the paramecium, and we also saw the amoeba. Okay, the amoeba was also one cell large. Um, there's your amoeba, and that's a funny shape. Look at that. And then paramecium is sort of this other shape. But there's lots of cells and may have lots of different shapes. So that's what I want to take a look at now, is point that out to you. Okay, animal cells are typically drawn round, but again, you see all the different organelles. We have the mitochondria, the Golgi, the endoplasmic reticulum. We have some other structures here that are involved with division. This is a centriole. Here's another mitochondria. This is a vesicle. There's other things that we have to talk about still, but there's lots of different types of organelles. Here's the big nucleus where the DNA is. Okay, and all of this in the cytoplasm with the membrane makes a typical animal cell, which we like to draw round. Okay. The plant cell we like to draw in a rectangle because that's really the shape of the plant cells. And plant cells have similar organelles like animal cells. You can see here a nucleus and the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi and the mitochondria, but there's something different in plant cells. There are chloroplasts. Here's a few chloroplasts. There's another one, and you also see a very large vacuole here. Okay, that's very characteristic of plants. And another thing that distinguishes the plant cells is they have a very thick cell wall made up of cellulose, but animal cells do not have. So here's another shape, rectangular, for the typical plant cell. Okay. Now, if we have a disc-like shape, okay, this is actually a biconcave disc because it's like round, but red blood cells do not have a nucleus. The nucleus is gone. So when the nucleus is gone, okay, this part of the cell will cave in on both the top and the bottom. And so you have what's called a biconcave disc, and that's what a red blood cell looks like. So it's a biconcave disc structure. So here's another shape of a cell, okay? We also have, for example, oops, I didn't want to do that. No. Okay, so there's my red blood cells. So I want to go to another type of cell, and this is called a goblet cell. You can see here, it's called a goblet cell because it looks like a goblet, you know, like a wine glass or something. It's a goblet cell, and you see here material is coming out. This cell secretes mucus, and it is going to be interspersed amongst these other more rectangular type of cells. And you would find a goblet cell in the intestinal tract, okay, to secrete mucus into the lumen or into the center of the small intestine, for example, okay? So you have goblet cells. That's another type of cell with a goblet type shape, okay? And let's see what else we have. Okay, look, sperm cells. Sperm cells are they have this round head, okay? They have midsection and a tail. The tail is a flagellum, and it kind of like has this whip-like motion, and so it can propel itself and it moves, okay? The egg cell is a large round cell, okay? And it's going to be where the sperm will penetrate. So here's different shapes of more cells. Sperm cells, okay, with the head and the tail. The egg cell is a very large round cell found in female ovary, okay? Sperm is produced in the male. Okay, here's another strange looking cell. This is a nerve cell or neuron, and you can see it's got a cell body with these extensions here. These are called dendrites. They receive electrical impulses from another nerve cell, and then it sends it throughout this axon area and to these endings onto the next nerve cell. So the nerve impulse comes in through here, gets integrated, and then it travels out through the axon. So you see this is another type of cell completely. It's got this very long axon, okay? Very different looking than any of the previous cells. So cell shapes are very different looking from one another, depending on their function. In muscle cells, actually there's three types of muscle. There is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is going to line the organs, like the digestive system, for example, or the arteries and the veins, okay? And we have skeletal muscle, which looks like this, more cylindrical type cells. These are found in the muscles like the biceps and the triceps, the ones that control the bones, that move the bones, okay? And then we have muscle cells that are just found on the heart. So they're called cardiac muscle cells. But let's take a look at the different shapes. Smooth muscle cells, they sort of have this shape where they're tapered at both ends. And this shape is called fusiform, okay? So it's tapered at the ends, or it's also called a fusiform cell, okay? They also call it a spindle shape. Why is it called a spindle shape? Well, if you think of the older homes with the banister going up the stairs, okay, what holds the banister from the railing that you kind of use to walk up to the floor? There are these pieces of wood, okay, that hold the banister, and they have a spindle shape. They kind of like are tapered, and they might expand a little bit, and then they taper as you get to the floor area. So that's why these cells are referred to as spindle-shaped or fusiform. Okay, and all of the muscle cells will shorten. They can contract. That's one of the properties they have. The skeletal muscle cells are cylindrical, as you see here. It's a cylindrical cell. And the cardiac muscle cells, they're cylindrical, but they branch. What we say, they bifurcate. Okay, they form a fork, and then they connect to the next cardiac cell. So these cells bifurcate, okay? They're branching cells. So we're seeing many different shapes: fusiform, cylindrical, and then bifurcating, three different types of muscle cells, okay? Here's another cell called a fibroblast, and it's sort of a star-shaped cell. And the fibroblast actually makes up the connective tissue. So we're going to find it in a particular type of tissue. We haven't gotten to tissues yet, but cells make up the next level, which are called tissues. But the fibroblast is going to be involved with connective tissue. We'll look at that again. The fibroblast has the ability to make fibers and matrix around itself to form connective tissues. It's another shape, star-shaped, okay? In the skin, you've got different types of cells. You've got epithelial cells, and skin lines the external part of the body, but it also lines, these cells also line the inside of cavities, like the GI system. In the GI tract, you've got these longer cylindrical, they're called columnar cells. They line the entire GI tract. And here again is our goblet cell, which secretes mucus. Okay. Sometimes the epithelial cells are more of a cube shape, so these are called cuboidal. And sometimes the epithelial cells, the skin cells, are flat, and they're called squamous. So there's different shapes of the epithelial cells, which are the ones we find on the inside and the outside of the body. Okay, so squamous, cuboidal, and columnar, all different shapes of different types of cells, of epithelial cells. Now, if we take our different types of cells, okay, what we can do now is we move to the next level of organization, okay? So cells, okay, when they are going to be very specialized, they get organized to carry out a particular function. So the next level that we get to are the tissues, okay, the tissues. And tissues simply are groups of cells that have a function, they're clustered together, and they carry out a certain function. So for example, all of the heart muscle cells that we saw earlier, okay, these over here, these are only found in the heart, and they will have the function of pumping the heart, okay? They make up cardiac muscle tissue, right? So all these cells together, all of these bifurcating cells, branching cells, called cardiac muscle cells, make up cardiac muscle tissue, okay? And what we can do is there's actually 4 types of tissues. There is epithelial tissue, the skin. There is connective tissue, which is sort of the glue that holds other cells together. There's muscle tissue, and there is nervous tissue. So there are 4 main types of tissues. So cells make up tissues, and the tissues are either epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve. Now, when you have tissues and they combine, 2 or more tissues, when they combine together, they will form an organ. Okay, so the tissues make up organs. Now, most organs have actually representatives of all 4 tissue types. You're going to have epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve in an organ. So let's take, for example, an organ called the stomach. Okay, the stomach is made up of 4 tissues, as we'll see in just a moment. Let's take a look. That's what the stomach looks like. It's an organ, okay? And it's an organ of the digestive system. And let's look at what goes on. This is inside the stomach. There's the food. Okay, so there's a section of the stomach, okay? And you can see that the stomach is lined by these epithelial cells making up epithelial tissue, okay? And we don't see it here, but interspersed among here are the goblet cells. But this is epithelial tissue lining the inside of the stomach, and it's going to have the function of secreting hydrochloric acid to digest, it's an acid, very strong acid, to digest the food, and also it secretes something called pepsin, okay? And it's also going to be involved with, pepsin actually will break down proteins that arrive in the stomach. So this tissue of the stomach, since this is the tissue that actually has the function of digestion, these epithelial cells making up epithelial tissue, this is going to be the primary tissue of the stomach. Now, surrounding those cells, the epithelial cells, we've got the connective tissue. Connective tissue kind of is the glue. It binds and packages, and it holds together the previous cells. So the connective tissue is sort of going to be on the outside layer here. And I draw it like this because it's sort of like a binding material. And inside of it, you're going to have those star-shaped fibroblasts that we saw earlier, okay? So there's connective tissue. So here you see our epithelial tissue made up of epithelial cells that secrete the hydrochloric acid and the pepsin, which is for the process of digestion in the inside of the stomach. These cells sit on top of connective tissue. And remember, the connective tissue is made up of those fibroblasts, those star-shaped cells we saw earlier, which secrete fibers and a matrix-type material around themselves, okay? So now you're seeing 2 tissue types in the stomach, but there's also muscle tissue, smooth muscle tissue around the connective tissue. So here, if you look very closely, these are the smooth muscle cells, these long, very tapered at the ends, these fusiform cells. When you've got lots of them together, you form smooth muscle tissue. Each one is a smooth muscle cell. Several of them form smooth muscle tissue. So remember what they look like. Each one look like this tapered shape, okay? This fusiform or spindle shape. And also surrounding that in the stomach, you've got nervous tissue. Here's one of those neurons. Remember the neurons with the long process, okay? These are the nerve cells. So there's nervous tissue. Lots of these neurons make up nerve tissue. So if we take a look at our whole stomach then, we've got the epithelial cells, okay? They're the primary tissue, making up epithelial tissue. Around that, we have the connective tissue, okay, made up of the fibroblasts. Around that, we have our smooth muscle tissue, made up of smooth muscle cells to help churn the contents in the stomach. And then the stomach is also regulated by nervous control, so we have a layer of nerve tissue. So this is sort of my drawing representing the stomach, which is an organ, which actually has the 4 different tissue types in it, okay? But to be an organ, you just have to have 2 types, 2 or more. But most organs have all 4 types: epithelial, connective, in this case, smooth muscle, and also the nervous tissue. So you've got the 4 different tissue types here in your organ, which is called the stomach. Okay, so tissues make up organs. Okay, so we're at the next level now. The tissues make up the organs. Okay. Now, let's take a look at where we've gotten so far. Okay, let's go back and look a minute. Okay, this picture doesn't have everything in it, but I added some of the things. We know that before the subatomic particles, there were quarks. Quarks make up the subatomic particles, which are the protons, neutrons, and electrons. Then those subatomic particles make up atoms. Atoms make up the molecules, like an amino acid. And then those make up larger molecules called proteins. Okay, here we're seeing macromolecules, and then macromolecules are going to make up the organelles, which is also not shown in this picture, but here's a nucleus. And then we have the cell, and then we have, this happens to be a smooth muscle cell, making up a smooth muscle tissue, which we know is going to be in the stomach. But we also know that there's epithelial tissue and nervous and connective. But if we look at the organs of the digestive system besides the stomach, well, you see here we have an esophagus, we have a small intestine, a large intestine, and a rectum. So we make up the next level of organization, which is the organ system. Okay, we have organ systems. Okay, organ systems. So, we want to go and take a look at some of the organ systems, but 2 or more organs interact, okay, and they make up organ systems. So, for example, here you're seeing the digestive system, but there's many different types of organ systems, which we'll look at in just a moment, but let's just finish the hierarchy. When you put all of the different organ systems together, that is the digestive, the respiratory, the circulatory, and so forth, and on and on and on, you eventually form an individual organism, okay? And then after we go from the individual organism, if you look at the nice little chart you have on, let's see, organization of nature is on, okay, it's on page 1, but you can start to see we've done the chemical levels, we've done the biological levels, okay, and we're going next into the ecological levels, okay, and all of this is written down for you on these pages, which you should read. It's a review of what we've gone over, but we want to take a look next at the different types of organ systems, okay, because they're worth looking at. And we'll do that in our next video.